Tonight we have Katie Alexander, who is a PhD student in the Families and Sport Lab at Utah State University, and also the social media manager for the Dark Side of Sport on Instagram. Her research primarily focuses on aspects of athlete adversity and organizational culture, and she currently has 4 manuscripts published in peer-reviewed journals and more research to be published soon. So with that, I will kick it off to you, Katie.
Thank you so much, and thanks to everyone for being here. So let me go ahead and share my screen so we can get started. Okay, dokie. So let me get things set up. So I titled this presentation today, Is Sport Doing What We Really Think It Is Doing? Um, as mentioned in the introduction there, I do a lot of work around more negative aspects of the sporting environment and also like athlete safeguarding and creating a positive environment for sports. So I hope today that we can talk a little bit about how you might do that at a more individualized level relating to how you translate values into your behaviors within a sports setting. So here is our outline, and um, I will say that I like some participation, so hopefully we can use the chat function, raise hand function throughout this process. I plan to do just a brief introduction about myself and my athletic background because it does influence how I understand sport. And then we'll talk about what we get out of sport involvement. Um, a value focused framework for assessing values and behaviors. And then we'll do an example of putting the framework into action and a worksheet with questions. And question and answer, all that stuff at the end. And you should have access to a worksheet that is associated with this. I also will have the slides shared after this presentation today. So, with that background in mind, as stated before, I am a PhD student and researcher, and I'm really concerned with especially athlete abuse in particular. So, growing up, I was a competitive soccer player from the ages of 10 to 18 years old, and my experiences were highly traumatic. So I won't get into detail about that, but that certainly shapes how I view sport and how I view my research more broadly. And I might use soccer as an example for if I use any examples throughout this, because that's the main sport that I know. Okay, so as kind of an icebreaker here, I wonder, so why athletes in particular, why do you participate in sport? And so you can choose to raise your hand or put something in the chat. Why do you participate in sport? I want to see at least 2 to 3 people hopefully give me some feedback. Social reasons, yeah. Yep. You make, I see that you make lifelong friendships. That's the same for me. The competition piece, the community piece, of course. Teammates, yeah. Lifelong friendships is this big theme. Passion, you just love doing what you do. You love your sport. Being part of a team, competition, those kind of things. Are we missing anything? Yeah. Okay, then. What about for coaches and professionals? What do you hope athletes get out of participating? What do you hope they're learning? You can put it in the chat, or you can voice it out loud. Raise your hand. Life skills, confidence, communication, team building, confidence and self-awareness. Want your athletes to feel supported. Yeah, these are really important life skills. Did you have something? Okay. Coach, leadership skills, values, feel a sense of belonging. Yeah, so all of these things are really positive, really good. Um, Social awareness. Yeah, we can definitely go on and on about the different values. So with regards to that, then, Um, within the research, we see that athletes in particular have a lot of reasons for participating. Some of these were mentioned here. I did not actually put the social reason, but yes, A lot of athletes participate for social reasons, but they also do it because it's fun and enjoyable, hopefully. Um, it's about succeeding, winning, being the best. It's about learning skills, both sport specific and life skills. And there's also this physical fitness component, especially at the youth level. With regards to like staying in shape, there is even an appearance component that is present if we look at research literature. Some people do participate because they want to maintain a certain type of appearance. Okay. But, and this is something that's really important when I talk to people on sport organizations and just in my research. Positive outcomes aren't innate to sport. You would think, that makes sense, right? Then that means that you can have negative outcomes in sport. And so anyone can feel free to chime in. What are some possible negative outcomes of participating in sport as an athlete? Yep, low self-esteem, failure, making mistakes, injuries, depression, struggling with balance. These are great. Feeling your identity as your sport, athletic identity. They call that rigid athletic identity in the research, where you only identify as an athlete and nothing else. Comparison, you're not good enough. Injury that takes them out of sport, so they are kind of forced to leave sport. It's more involuntary. These are great. In the research, we see, I've highlighted a few of these. You guys did a great job. There's this aspect of sport injury, but I also want to highlight that there are components related to the normalization of aggression, meaning it becomes acceptable. This is especially apparent in like contact sports, like football, for example. I mean, you've got to make contact with people, right? But it can also be in how athletes treat each other, and it can be how coaches and athlete support staff treat athletes, because sometimes certain behaviors get normalized, like yelling. Um, it could even be demeaning and degrading each other. There's also losing or poor sportsmanship. So, like bad losing, you kind of need to lose gracefully, but some people get very angry when they lose. There's cheating, there's doping in sport, and then there's also this, and kind of hinting at the mental health component. You participate even though you are under extreme duress. Maybe you have physical injuries, or maybe you just feel like you can't stop psychologically in some way, shape, or form. You must keep participating. Okay. So, what makes this really complicated is sport isn't just all good or all bad. It can simultaneously be both positive and a negative place for athletes, coaches, others. And so, a question I often ask in my research and more broadly, so how do we make sure sport is a safe and positive place for all? And something that I tell people to think about, so first you need to identify your lines. So we talk about there are some gray lines in sport, because certain behaviors you're going to have if you're in sport, especially at a high level. So this is a little more contested if you're working out like a recreation level. But like for example, winning, that is an important in competition or integral to sport. Um, so you have to navigate your grays. So what do I mean by this? Okay, let's think about these are some common behaviors in sports settings. For a coach or athlete support staff, yelling is a common behavior. And I don't necessarily mean just being loud. I mean like directly like getting into an athlete's face, spitting on them, being aggressive, maybe even criticizing them um, as a person. And for athletes, there's this idea of trash talk. You got to trash talk your opponent. So you have to decide and be reflective and be intentional. When do your behaviors cross the line and become negative? Is yelling or trash talking, does it cross the line and become bad or negative when it no longer helps aid in performance or winning? So with this as a benchmark, um, that means that, it's fine to yell or to trash talk as long as we're winning. That's acceptable as a behavior. I can do that as long as it helps with winning. Um, does it become negative when the intent becomes to harm others or it harms others? Do you decide that that behavior of yelling at athletes crosses the line when you start noticing that your athletes are really, really sad all the time? They're scared of you? Is it or trash talking too when you start to harm others, harming the opponent long term? Um, does this behavior cross the line when we become obsessed with it? It's all we can think about. We start noticing we're angry all the time. We can only think about winning and yelling and being angry and trash talking when it doesn't align with a positive development or a sense of integrity. So there are some people that will say that yelling is never okay, nor is trash talk. I don't necessarily say that because I'm very athlete centered, meaning I try to listen to what athletes want, and there is a time and a place for that. Um, but what about when it doesn't actually align with what we want people to learn and develop in sport, or it goes against our sense of integrity? As a coach, I would never really want to yell and degrade and get into people's faces just because that crosses my own line, that I don't consider that strong integrity, and it's really hard for me to do that in the first place as a person, right? So you have to decide, when do your behaviors in sport cross the line and become like very negative? Okay. And so one way that we promote safe and positive sport environments as athletes, coaches, others is being really intentional in our goal setting and aligning our values with our behaviors. Okay, so we're going to talk about that now. And the aim of this framework helps to break up values into goals and behaviors or actions. And if you take a look at the worksheet, this is based on ACT therapy, acceptance commitment therapy. You can look at the worksheet for more information on that one. So, what are values? Um, Everyone probably kind of knows what values are. They're kind of hard to define, though, in words sometimes. I like to think of values as kind of your guiding compass. This figure has good and evil on it, which I don't always love because sometimes it's about just being functional or dysfunctional, adaptive, maladaptive, or progress or regress. And our values are really important in our life, but also in sport because they provide guidance for how to live, how to be a good athlete or an ideal athlete, how to be a good coach, idealized coach, but they also provide us with meaning and direction in our lives. And values can be based in a lot of different places, like spiritual things, cultural things, religious things. But overall, if we use values successfully and well, they can help us to assess if our actions are in alignment with how we want to be in life. Are we in align with our values, or are we misaligned based on how we are behaving? If we say we want to be a calm coach or athlete, and we go and we look at our behaviors, are we actually keeping our cool and managing our emotions? Or are we acting in a very angry and aggressive manner and being reactive? Okay. So, and you guys can chat this or speak out loud, thinking about the broad values that we might want to showcase within sport and life. So, what are some of these values? Work ethic, compassion. What else? These are great. Sportsmanship. Yeah. Patience, perseverance, leadership, resiliency. Awesome. Yeah. Empathy. These are great values. And so I've listed similar ones too. This. So things like support, being assertive and a good communicator, that's important in sport. Connection, cooperation, fitness and skill, um, even, just being physically fit. Kindness and compassion, accountability, patience, leadership, self-control, self-development, self-care, responsibility, resiliency, all these different things. Good sportsmanship. Okay. Um, and I've kind of demarcated these as being kind of green because most people will say these are positive, generally. Now, we can get into how these could become extreme and not necessarily helpful for people, but they're generally viewed as positive. Okay. Sport is a unique environment, though. So there are other values that are present in sport, like I mentioned, that are more negative. So can you tell me a little bit about what values might be present in sport that are more negative? Oop, no. Okay. Being overly competitive, yes, absolutely. What else do we think? Yeah, trying to be overly resilient, power and control, aggression, absolutely. Comparison, yeah. Perfectionism is one that I think of too. Um, so I also have this list here. Authority, power, personal achievement, competition, dominance. All of these here are also, I think, included and highlighted in the worksheet. But basically, the idea here is these aren't necessarily bad. And culture in other cultures, sometimes these are prioritized as important, such as like cultures that have high authority, um, differentials, meaning you have a high respect for authority. Um, but broadly, these values are kind of yellow because they can go a little too far. You can become a little too aggressive, too focused on power and authority, or being overly competitive. Okay. So, like I mentioned, these values are important to sports, so they're not inherently bad. And so within this more individualized framework, you can think about how you engage in intentional value-based processing to set goals and then go back and reflect. So you identify values, reflect, and set goals. So we'll talk about each of this, then we'll go into an example, um, and then we'll go from there. So in this process, the first thing you do is you identify a value that you want to embody or promote in sport. I recommend starting with just a single value because it can start getting really complicated when you focus on more than one value. Um, okay. Then you reflect on what this value means to you as a person in order to better understand um, how this value translates into specific behaviors. Okay. So I have some reflection questions for this. So culture is about what sports culture says about this value, how you should act. Um, Something like strength in sport cultures can be really important, for example. But you also have to decide what you want to embody and how you want to.
Send opponent.
Sorry? Okay, there we go. Um, you have to also decide how you want to define a particular value. Okay. You also have to kind of assess what behaviors embody or are in alignment with this value and what behaviors are not aligned or opposed to this value. And then you do more of a self-reflection. Okay. Are you currently engaging in behaviors that are in alignment? What are some barriers that get in the way of this value? So the third step in this is goal setting, and I won't get into super specifics about goal setting, but some things I want to highlight. So first, uh, this value and the related behaviors need to be important to you. You shouldn't just have a goal because you think other people want you to have this goal kind of thing. So it needs to matter to you. You can utilize various heuristics to set goals. One that's really popular is SMART goals, which are specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and timely. So you're very specific in what the goal means. You set a timeline, you make sure it's measurable, achievable to you, etc. And then also, the second part of this that people forget about is checking back in on your goals. And when you do this, you actually need to be intentional in when and where you check in. And you might ask yourself specific reflection questions around like wins you had related to your goal. What are some barriers or issues that you ran into? Do you still see this value as important? What worked, what didn't, basically? Do you still want to embody it? Do you need to adjust your behaviors or goals? You go from there. Okay, so now you guys have an understanding of the framework we're working with. Let's use an example related to strength. So and we can use the example of soccer because that makes it a little bit easier to deal with a value. So in soccer, what might soccer think about strength related to behaviors? What makes a strong athlete? If you want to put it in the chat or speak out loud. Somebody.
I don't understand the question. Like, do you mean physically strong or what type
Yeah,
of strong?
yeah. So that would be how you define it. So maybe it
Okay,
is physical strength, or maybe it
then
is more psychological in nature. That's great.
got it.
Yeah.
Okay, I'd say endurance then. That'd be
Okay. Fantastic. So it would be endurance. What else? Hard to get knocked over. Yeah. So you're strong on, you're not, it's not easy to knock you over. Maybe you're an aggressive player. Maybe you're a fast runner. Maybe with strength, we're thinking about fitness. So then you have to get into the like, what does this mean? What does this mean to me more broadly, etc. So maybe I say that I want a really physical definition of strength, meaning fitness. I don't want to get knocked around and I want to have endurance. Yeah. Bouncing back, strong mind. Yep, that would be very psychological too. So like some people would call that mental toughness, etc. Um, and so based on this definition, how I define these things, great. Resilience. Um, I start like parsing out the behaviors that are in alignment and not in alignment with this value. So if I am looking at physical strength, um, we can think about I don't want to get knocked off the ball. I don't want to be weak. I want to make sure that my endurance is high. If we're looking at it from a more psychological perspective, maybe we're looking at mental toughness as related to like resiliency. So I'm able to overcome obstacles. Um, I'm able to challenge myself, et cetera, et cetera. So then you assess kind of what you're doing. Maybe, and it's a little easier for strength if we think physical. Um, Maybe I'm engaging in behaviors related to lifting weights, to ensure that I am physically strong. Maybe if we look more psychologically, I am ensuring that I challenge myself to get outside of my comfort zone in some way. Specifically, maybe I do like I work to failure in my sets when it makes sense. Okay. And then barriers that might get in the way.
Have you
So,
seen anyone on?
yes. Oh, um, barriers that get in the way would be just anything environmental. Maybe I'm in season, so this is not a good choice for me to focus on physical strength right now, because then I would have to try to build muscle while I'm in season, which those things don't go together because you typically will want to maintain muscle. Okay. So, um, and then you get really specific once you figure out how this value translates into various goals. So I chose to translate strength in terms of assertiveness or aggressive and assertive as a player. So that would be more the physical route of not getting knocked down. Um, so if I choose to be more assertive with my teammates, coaches, and opponents, assertive communication means that I can state my needs. Okay. So maybe I have a hard time talking to my coach because I'm scared to talk to them. Um, I find them intimidating. So maybe the specific goal would be to be more assertive with my coach and to do that by literally saying hi to them every single day and asking them about what we are going to be doing today, okay, at our trainings. So clearly that is a specific goal. It's measurable because I either did not do it or I did it. It should be achievable. Um, it is relevant and important to me. And then timely, I mean, it clearly has a start and an end. And then you develop kind of a specific plan for checking back in. It can be sometimes a little harder with broad goals, broad values, but you can still get there. Um, and I would recommend setting no more than 3 to 5-ish goals at a time, related to a value. But it's better to focus on only a couple at a time. Okay, so um, I wanted to take a pause with regards to the handout and to see if anyone has any questions about the handout or about translating values into behaviors and actions in sport. Okay, I will go ahead and scoot on. There were some submitted questions that we can talk about. So I'll have Aaron read those and then we can talk about them.
Yeah, so the first one is from a coach and or professional. So they asked, how can coaches take care of their own mental health while supporting athletes with theirs? Also, I see more athletes speaking out about mental health, but not coaches. Why do you think we don't hear as much from coaches, and how or where can or should coaches speak out and have these conversations?
Yeah, that's fantastic. As a question. So whoever submitted that, fantastic. Basically, and what sucks is I can't rely on research literature for this answer, but the idea here is that it's very stigmatized um, very stigmatized for coaches to talk about their mental health, just as much as it's stigmatized for athletes, if not more so. It is technically a workplace. Um, and so why would you talk about that in a workplace environment? I also believe that oftentimes we see this coach as this really strong authority figure, and that's who they're supposed to be. Even if that isn't who they should be or it isn't healthy, right? So, especially at the intercollegiate level, I see like this lack of like work-life balance, et cetera, burnout. These kinds of things are not addressed because of that stigma there. So I would say, um, being willing to talk about it with other professionals that you trust, other coaches, and you can be more formal in how you talk to athletes when you talk about mental health, but you can also just, highlight, hey, I'm not having the greatest time, but this is how I'm getting through it. Or in the past, I struggled with this and that, but I got through it and I'm here now. Um, yes. And so that is kind of my answer to that. It really depends, but yes. So, like systematically, I think that there is a social stigma around that. And some first steps could be to simply just say, hey, as a coach, I am struggling. If you model that for athletes, that is helpful, as opposed to always putting up a strong persona. And someone in the chat said, I feel like a lot of coaches don't have their own tools, didn't learn it themselves, so they can't model. Exactly. Yeah. Okay.
Great. So the second question we have here is, are there patterns in how athletes and coaches internalize pressure or burnout?
Yes. So I would say the answer to that question is yes, I am not a research burnout expert, so I can't speak to exactly how that looks. What I can say is the most important part of burnout is the psychological component because there is this devaluation of sport, of your accomplishments. You kind of feel like participation isn't worth it anymore or coaching isn't worth it anymore. And so that is the part to target even more so than the physical aspects of burnout. So that is all that I could say to answer that question.
And how do we navigate safe space conversations at a time when talking about DEI-based topics could get us fired or put our university on blast?
Yes, this is especially relevant question depending on, well, federally in the US, but also state by state. I'm from Utah, so um there are a lot of limitations to what you can and cannot say. So I would say first be aware of those policies, but also you can still foster inclusive environments without necessarily saying diversity, equity, inclusion. And you can do that again formally through talking to athletes or more informally just through showing them um, affirming who they are as people as opposed to rejecting who they are. So for example, if they are LGBTQ plus, rather than saying, well, that's weird or that's not acceptable. You can't have a relationship like that while you're in season because it looks bad on us. That's highly rejecting. Say something like, well, okay, then I accept you. If you need to talk to me about it, that's okay. Or I can refer you to the proper resources for support. Or I don't know much about LGBTQ plus people or how to help them, to be honest, but I'm willing to learn with you. You can say something like that as opposed to something that's rejecting. You want to be accepting of athletes broadly. Hey.
Great. And we have another one. How do we help parents understand the importance of letting their child fail in sports as a good thing?
Yes, this can be definitely very hard societally because parents just want, hopefully, their children to succeed. Right? So I would say having conversations with parents more individually about like, well, what do mistakes mean? Do they mean like your athlete is losing all their opportunities for a future sport participation? Are they like catastrophizing it basically? Or is it more so that these parents just they're scared, they don't necessarily know the sport, they don't know how to react. So you kind of have to approach it at a one-to-one level to better understand why does the parent think making a mistake is so bad? Starting there is really useful. I try to assume the best in people, so I assume they just simply are nervous, anxious, scared that their child is going to lose opportunities in some way for mistakes. Um, and if they are, then you can reassure them that, hey, that's not the case. Mistakes are really important for learning skills, being in sport, etc.
Okay, great. And it looks like we have one last question. Um, what advice would you give to any campus captains, athletes, coaches, and professionals for upholding your values as an athlete and or a coach if your coach or your peers or your boss is not supportive?
Fantastic question. So I would say it really depends. An environment like that is not supportive can be really hard, but you can still uphold your integrity, and that's where you decide your lines there, for one thing. Because often, you don't want to be in a completely toxic, unsupportive environment, even abusive environment, I'll go so far as to say, or destructive environment, because that's going to really be harmful to you in the long term. In the short term, though, I would say know your supporters, rally your supporters, um, be willing to embody, like practice what you preach, and then also take time away. Make sure you have adequate coping because it's hard to function in a system like that, to be honest with you. Um, but accept that sometimes, you can only do the best you can. And sometimes being a good role model can push the system in a more positive direction. So you can hope for that. But yeah, it if the system is really destructive or rigid, it can be hard to shift that.
Great. All right. Well, if that's all, if nobody else has any other questions or anything, we can go ahead and stop here. But thank you so much, Katie, for this. This was amazing. And thank you all the participants for being here. Like I said, we know you're super busy right now. So we're very grateful that you came to listen to Katie tonight.
Yep. Thanks so much, guys, for being here. I do also want to say, like, if you have any questions for me, about this particular topic, about how to apply it, or about like abuse in sport more broadly, organizational culture, you can always reach out to me at my email or my Instagram. So thanks, y'all.